Hello everyone, welcome back. Thank you so much for tuning in today. I wanted to continue my series here on the current standard, most popular decks that you'll be running into. Today, I've already covered mono black. I want to cover mono red today as well. So there are, to each deck, I'm learning, especially these monocolored decks, there really are a few different key variations for each one. And neither of them are necessarily poor. I do think there are better versions, but it really depends on what you're playing up against on the ladder, and that might depend on where you are on the ladder. So first, I would like to cover what I think is probably just the slightly better mono red list. So we're heavy on the one drops here, obviously, like you want to be. A lot of four ofs. So 4 Kamano, 4 Swift Spear, 4 Phoenix Chick. I'm a huge proponent of Phoenix Chick. A lot of the lists are cutting back on this card. I think it's a pure mistake. This card is insane. It really combos well with your Kamano to get the counter on it. It forces removal that you can then bring back later, and with the counter still on it technically because it gets +1/+1. So it's a very good card. We are 4 on the Play with Fire and then 2 Strangle. So I really like this card. Just 1 mana, deal 3 damage. This is exceptional for getting rid of Flesh Gorgers, the Graveyard Trespassers. You can deal with that. You can deal with those cards extremely well with this, or maybe it's just a soldier's list and their mentor got a counter on it. Strangle takes care of that. It's a really good catch-all. Kills Sorin. So if they play Sorin Mirthless and they -2. You can either kill the Vampire Nighthawk that it makes, the 2/3 flying vampire with lifelink, or you could just use it to kill the Sorin, the Wandering Emperor or Wandering Emperor tokens. The card is very good. I do like having some number of it in here. 1 Shivan Devastator. The reason, so I'm normally not a fan of having one-ofs, right? Normally, I at least like to play 2. The Shivan Devastator is a house, I think. This card is extremely good. There's potential in here to cut something for it, maybe a Squee. Squee is performing very good for me right now, however, so I'm currently a bit higher on Squee because I'm running into less removal and running into more just, creature-based decks. But if you're spending 3 mana and getting cut down a lot, so if on turn 3 you're playing Squee and it's getting cut down every time, then maybe you should consider playing something else. Another Shivan Devastator might be a good option. But whenever you're playing a bunch of creatures and they have to trade for it, that like Mono White has to trade one of their 2/2s or 2/1s for it, and then you can recur it later with all the creatures they've already killed or traded for. It's pretty good. And against control, especially, which I'm also playing up against a fair amount of control, being if they do not exile it, if it's destroyed, being able to recur this is very good. So if you're playing up against more high-end mid-range decks or control, probably more Squee. You're playing up against more creature-based decks that like to muddy up the ground, or playing up against more of the aggressive versions of mono black, then maybe you want to cut down on Squee and go for the flyer instead. So that's currently why I have 1 Shivan Devastator. Squee is also legendary, so you do not want 4, but 3 might be too much depending on the types of decks that you're playing against. I have the full Bloodthirsty Adversary. This card is just enough to get wins. So you can play it on turn 2 as just a 2/2 haste. Sometimes it's with an additional counter on it from your Kumano, which will help it dodge the cut down. It's very good. I've seen some people want to cut down on this card for an extra Feldon. You could do this, but I think having the versatility of blocking and also being able to recast your spells, since we are playing the Strangle, we're a bit heavier on the spells here with Lightning Strike, Play with Fire, and Strangle. Extremely valuable, but sometimes later in the game, it opens up your outs. I feel that with mono red, you get them to 1, 2, 3 life a lot, and they have just enough board presence to stop you from finishing the game. And all of a sudden, Bloodthirsty Adversary just adds 4 more outs to what you need to finish off the game because it lets you recast that Lightning Strike or that Play with Fire from your graveyard, or Strangle if you have to. So I still like the 4 Bloodthirsty Adversary over a 3/3 split between that and the Feldon. Feldon's a great card, don't get me wrong, but with a lot of mono white right now and they play the ossification, it can deal with Feldon quite easily, so I don't think there's as much upside to play this card. I just think Adversary is better, and it's a bit of a mana sink later into the game for mono red. A Arena has a tendency to flood players, so having something that can at least take some kind of advantage of that for mono red later in the game is incredibly important. Okay, so we are not very heavy on 3-drops at all. There's a lot of good 3-drops that you can play in mono red at the moment. A lot of great planeswalkers. There's also mechanized warfare, but you have the squee. But I feel like playing too many 3-drops is a trap. You want to keep it to 1 and 2. Having a couple to round up your curve here is fine. And then at the very, very top end, we have Thundering Raiju. Of course, this card is probably among my favorite cards in Standard at the moment. This card is great. I love this card. I love casting it. It feels awesome. It has to eat a removal or a counter spell. If it does not, there's a strong chance you win the game just off attacking with this card alone. Stoke the Flames. I loved playing with Stoke the Flames back when it was first printed. This card is amazing. It's not really a 4-mana spell. You can treat it as that. Sometimes I have just hard cast this for the win, but just having that way to give my creature some utility later in the game. Again, when your soldier's opponent or your mono blue opponent maybe too, when they've just flooded the board and they're really low on life, but they flooded the board, you can't get through. If it's mono blue, they have all the flyers, the Djinn, and you can't get your Phoenix Chicks through to win the game. Being able to tap those creatures for a Stoke the Flame instead to maybe even kill the Djinn, which has 4 toughness, or just to send it to their face to finish off the game against any opponent is extremely good. So I am running 2 Stoke the Flames. Not many lists are really embracing this card. I think it's a mistake. If I had to pick one deck, which I feel like I'm the expert on, it's probably both mono red and mono black, because that's what I used to hit rank 1 mythic last time. And I've been a huge burn player, mono red player for a huge part of my Magic playing career. I love red, green, and black. I love Jund, red-green monsters. I love Rakdos. Those are the types of decks I enjoy playing. And I do not feel like this card is being utilized as much as what it should be. Now, I'm not saying to go run 4 of these. I think Standard is getting to a point where maybe some type of burn list is feasible with Stoke the Flames. Maybe you go down less on like Thundering Raijus and keep the curve a bit lower, play Mechanized Warfare. And I think there might be some potential for that, but I think for right now, just having like a few of these just to finish off your opponent or to deal with those weird 4 toughness creatures or something that has a counter on it is very valuable. And having the flexibility to cast this with your creatures makes it insane. So since we have some 3-drops and we do have some 4-drops here, we run 22 lands. One of these is a Sekinzin. I do not like running Mishras in these style of decks. You could probably get away running 1 or 2, but especially if you play best of 1, there's something that happens with the Arena hand smoothing and the Shuffler, which I know we all have our issues with anyway, but it will give you, if you play 1 or 2, you'll have it in your opening hand. And because Arena likes to really mess with your mana, especially in best of 1, you have to have a red source on turn 1, always. Because we have so many 1-drops. You have to play this on turn 1. So I do not like to risk not having red mana on turn 1. If you want to run a Mishra's Factory, you could probably cut a mountain for 1, still play 22 lands to ensure that you're casting your Raiju on curve. But I would not play more than 1 Mishra's Factory, really. And I've just went away from using it at all, just because I find that it slows me down too much. Because even if you do have 2 lands on turn 1 and turn 2, if the second one's a Mishra's Factory, that stops you from enabling one of your biggest combos of all, which is the triple spell, right? On turn 2, on turn 3, or the double spell on turn 2. So turn 1 Kumanu, turn 2 Phoenix Chick Swift Spear, or turn 2 Phoenix Chick removal spell, turn 2 Swift Spear removal spell. Having that colorless mana really takes away what your deck is really meant to do. Those powerful early game double spell, triple spells in a turn that get you the wins before the game even gets going, it's completely gone. It's because you put 1 land in your mana base that Arena is probably going to give you most of the time. I find that Sekinzin provides me just that little bit of flexibility. that I need, but also just playing it as a red source, which is what I do most of the time. But later in the game, having especially with Stoke the Flames, later in the game, just having the 2/1/1s that you can make is very valuable. So this is the list I would recommend. You can make some minor deviations to this depending on what you're playing against on the ladder currently. Maybe you go down on Squee, up on Shiv and Devastator. Maybe you go down on Strangle and up on a Feldon or something like that. It really just depends. But this is one way of playing mono red at the moment. Now, you have another option. If you are doing nothing but playing up against soldiers round after round after round, you can play something that looks like this. Now, this is a high win rate list I pulled from online. I don't recommend it, this one specifically, but we can talk about the strategy though. So in the festivities, I think, again, depending on where you are on the ladder and what you're playing against, if you're playing up against a lot of soldiers and a lot of wedding announcements and things like that, then in the festivities might be where you want to take this. So I do like the end of festivities, even if it's just a bunch of other mono red lists. In the festivities might be a great place to be. Obviously, if you're playing up against a lot of Esper or a lot of Dimir, a lot of Azorius, a lot of mono black, in the festivities might not be where you want. But if you're up against a bunch of soldiers or mono red, in the festivities can do it, and you can take the position of a control deck. I'll probably make a video at some point on just general Magic strategy about knowing where you are, if you're the control list or if you're the beatdown, if you're the aggro. But you can swap it up like this. And so this deck enables you to do that. I mean, nobody really expects a board wipe from mono red that doesn't hit them. There are some big red lists that play the Brotherhood's card that deals 3 damage to everything, but that wipes your creatures out too. Having in the festivities just to target your opponent's creatures is insane. This deck also has this weird combination of rabbit batteries and reinforced Ronin. So this right here is just a major trap. I know it seems great, like, oh my gosh, it's Goblin Guide in Standard. It is not, and do not be mistaken about that. This card is pretty bad. So its only upside is it's a recurring shock that you can then channel to draw a card, but with mono red, this is what you're doing. You are shocking your opponent once or twice if you are extraordinarily lucky. And then you're taking your turn 3 to discard it and draw a card, play a 1-drop if you are very lucky again. That requires a whole lot of luck to make this work right. And on top of that, your opponent probably plays something that just makes this not worth it at all. Rabbit Battery is an okay card because of Reconfigure, but I just think we have strictly better 1-drops we want to be focusing on. Most notably, this list essentially cut 2 Phoenix Chick or 2 Rabbit Battery or 2 Reinforced Ronin. I think the Rabbit Battery has a stronger argument. The Reinforced Ronin, I just would not mess with this card at all. However, where this deck is going, I think, is probably on the right path within the festivities. So I would probably up the 2 Phoenix Chick, cut the Ronin, cut the Rabbit Battery, add the extra in the festivities. I would go over here to the 3-drops. I would cut these Chandras out, add in Mechanized Warfare, just go all in on the festivities plan. That, I think, is what this deck wants to do. I understand the premise here, though. They are attempting to use in the festivities as a controlling hedge against their aggressive opponents, and then looking to draw cards with Reinforced Ronin, or technically not drawing cards, it's technically cycling cards or looting cards, I should say, because you have to discard then draw. So you have to loot one away and then draw it, and it just so happens to be the Reinforced Ronin, which is probably your worst card. It's probably worse than a land in most cases with this deck too. But this deck is trying to go all in on being, hey, if I'm going to play against soldiers in mono red every game, I'm going to be the control person, wipe the board within the festivities, and play with fires and lightning strikes. And then I'm going to play something like a Chandra or a JF Fiery Negotiator and finish the game. And then you have some play against control decks as well. You have Furnace Punisher and Squee. Furnace Punisher, listen, if you're playing Best of 1, do not play this card, because everybody in Best of 1 is going to have 2 or more basic lands, because you are playing against primarily mono red, mono white, mono blue, or mono black. On occasion, you may run into somebody that's trying control in best of one, but this card is just not there. Do not play it. If you're playing best of threes, you have a much stronger argument of playing this card because there is a lot of Esper running around at the moment. You may want to give this a shot. Even just the Dimir decks, or sometimes Azorius Soldiers, can really be hit by this card as well. 3 mana, 3/3 Menace is already not terrible, but then having the added benefit of dealing 2 damage if they have an adventurous mana base, I should say, is really good. Okay, so on top of that, a lot of these decks are playing Nahiri's Warcrafting. I'm not against this card necessarily. So 3 mana to deal 5 damage. You get to look at the top X and exile 1. You can play it this turn. But let's take a look at this deck's mana base. It's only playing 19 lands, one of which is a Mishra's Foundry, which I've already talked about why we probably do not want to play this card. 2 Sakinzin as well. This deck's mana base is a little off. And on top of that, even if you do get to Nahiri's Warcrafting and cast something, you have to do it this turn. You probably won't be able to with only 19 lands. So this deck does play on the lower side of things. It's like a weird 3 mana mono red control-ish style deck. But, you know, if you want to go in on this Nahiri's Warcrafting, you probably want to take away the Mishra's Foundry, go down to Sakinzin, go up to, 22 lands, maybe 23, add in another 4 mana Walker or something like that. So these are your options. I recommend going with the first list. If you want to play an End the Festivities, though, I certainly do not blame you. But what I would be doing is removing this Nahiri's Warcrafting, and maybe these Furnace Punishers too, adding in Mechanized Warfares, going more all in on that plan, adding 2 more Phoenix Chick, cutting the Ronins, and really playing to the strengths of In the Festivities and Mechanized Warfare. That would be my plan. So that's where I'm at for Mono Red right now. Hope to continue this series, making additional videos. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a wonderful day.